the United States the keeper of the world? That's what we're discussing today on the Opinion Talk Show, the talk show where your opinions matter. I am your host, Mirna Santiago, and discussing this important topic with me today are three gentlemen to my left here. First off is attorney Donald Sandford, who was the former president of the Westchester County Bar Association. So welcome, Don.
Nice to be here.
Professor Ed Grippe, professor of philosophy and ethics. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you.
And Professor Tyrone Simpson, professor of American Studies. Welcome, Tyrone.
Thank you, Mirna.
Okay. So let's get right into it. We've seen so many conflicts lately, right? We've seen Syria, Iraq, and now people are looking at us to see what to do about Iran and North Korea. It seems like every time there's a conflict somewhere in the world, people are looking to the United States to be the keeper, to be the peacekeeper, the economic keeper. You know, if somebody's having a financial issue, their currency is melting down, they're looking to us. So is the United States the keeper of the world? We're going to start with you, Don.
I think we are, and I think it's almost goes back to the schoolyard bully scenario. Mm-hmm. If you are the biggest boy on the schoolyard and you see somebody else being bullied, you have a moral obligation, in my mind, to go and protect that other child. And I think as we are situated currently in the world, we are the biggest kid in the schoolyard. And so when we see human rights violations taking place across the world, we are responsible for going and protecting those who can't protect themselves. It's the responsibility that comes with the power, and that's both military power and economic power. And if you don't use that power responsibly, eventually you lose it, and you lose your moral authority as well.
So are you saying that we should be the keeper? I know you're saying we are, but should we be the keeper or should we not?
I think we should. I think we have a moral responsibility because of where we're positioned in the world, both economically and militarily. I think we should be.
We should be. Okay, Ed.
I think no. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that oftentimes people will go and think collectively as a nation that they're for the good. Even Hitler thought he was acting for the good. Mm-hmm. But what we need to do is to be able to go and reflect on this. I mean, we went into Iraq, and perhaps we should have used better judgment. We went into Vietnam, and maybe we should have used better judgment. We're opposing ISIS for good reasons. And so what is the good? One way to go and be sure that we don't, push forward our version in sort of almost a politically imperialistic way is not to go and follow a kind of a rulership with exceptionalism as our guide, but a leadership. And there's a big difference between the two. The rulership is saying my principles, my ideals are the best in all cases, and I'm going to promote them, and I'm the big guy on the who could go and stand up to these bullies, okay? Leadership is to go and recognize that there might be some problems in the world that are serious and must be taken care of, but we go and look to others to go and either agree with reason or to allow for disagreement and some sort of dialogue to go and guide our actions. The issue often comes again, what is the good, and to go and have that scenario that Don was just talking about the bully. Yes, but of course there could be a perspective that the bully, from a Chinese perspective, is the United States, whereas of course we will go and think that the bully is the Chinese, perhaps. So dialogue again is most important.
Mm-hmm. Tyrone.
Well, I mean, Don said it earlier. I just see it as a golden rule, right? Because of the United States position economically as well as bully. So it's economic and military power, and that dictates what the United States can do. Unfortunately, as Ed mentioned, there have been a number of moments throughout United States history where the U.S. has not had the moral compass that was necessary to be a leader of the world. And so is America the keeper of the world? Yes. Will it continue to be the keeper of the world? Yes. Should it be? No. Because military and economic success does not mean that one has a monopoly on moral sensibility or monopoly on reason. And so my concern is that everyone should participate in policing each other. And right now, the United States is the police for everyone else, and that's a problem.
Well, when you think about it, too, I agree with Ed that it should not be the keeper of the world. And the reason for that is, if you look at it, the United States is a pretty new nation, right? I mean, we got independence in, 1776. So we're like 200 years out. And I understand what you're saying, Don, about the fact that the United States has so much economic power, so much military power, that it should be out policing, but I have to disagree with you. And the reason for that is that, first of all, the United States picks and chooses where it's going to do its policing. So if you're going to do that, then you shouldn't be policing. For instance, China is atrocious with respect to the human rights violations, right? North Korea is atrocious with respect to the human rights violations. The United States is not going to go pick a fight with China because it relies on it economically, right? The stuff that China is sending over, all of the materials that China is sending over, the lending that the United States does with China. So it's not going to pick a fight with China. It's not going to pick a fight with North Korea because it's North Korea. And it's a really aggressive leader, and they hate us over there and what have you. So the United States is really picking and choosing its battles to try to make itself seem like this imperial world leader and what have you. But at the same time, all it's doing is getting itself into debt, and it's despised throughout the world. So I think that we need to focus on what we need to do here, whether it's economically, focus on our finances, whether it's focusing on our people, focusing on the racial issues that we're experiencing, and not go looking out into the world to see where we can impose our views and our values.
When you see 146 children slaughtered in a school, and you have the strongest army on earth, I can't imagine that you would sit by and just watch that and say, too bad for them.
But yet we can't fix the gun control laws here that our own children are getting slaughtered in our schools.
We can't fix the laws, or we can't fix the people who follow the laws.
Either way, our kids are getting killed in the schools. Every other week you turn on the TV and somebody's going into a school with an automatic weapon and killing 26 children, 5 children, 6 children, 20 children. We can't fix that. Yet we want to go over to the Middle East and stop them killing their children?
The schoolyard bully who gets settled down by the strongest kid on the schoolyard, the strongest kid on the schoolyard may not be on the high honor roll. That doesn't mean he should put his protecting the weaker child aside while he's working on his Latin homework. Kind of need to do both.
But, again, the idea here is, putting aside the domestic issues about gun violence, the U.S. exceptionalism seems to be based on the idea of a high moral ground. Now, in World War II, we were opposing a totalitarian regime in Germany under the Nazis. We were opposing an imperialistic juggernaut in Japan. And we stood up for what? The principles of freedom, okay? When we then claim exceptionalism, that we have the principle and we're the ones to go and enforce it, we become the bully. Now imagine we flipped it around. Suppose somebody with Newtown decided that, and our guns, readily in our hands, is a danger to human rights. And suppose they decided to come in with an occupying army to go and impose their will on us for our own good. What do you think Americans would go and think? The idea of going over there gung-ho with, as we did in Vietnam, for the right and the good to go and hold back communism, ignored what? The rights of people to decide for themselves. The misconception of containment policy that was going to work. The history of Vietnam and the fact that even at the beginning of Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh, that he was modeling his constitution on the U.S. Constitution, and misunderstanding the world puts us in a position where when we go over, even for what we perceive to be the good, we might misunderstand things like we have done in Iraq. We might act in a very aggressive and counterproductive way, as we did in Vietnam, and we therefore might go and exacerbate issues that are maybe are legitimate concerns of those who want to protect kids from the bullies, and help the bully out, such as we did when we were in Iraq and Afghanistan, by putting people into prisons because we suspected or thought they were going to be terrorists, and therefore bred the terrorist problem. So.
And gave them weapons that, you know, the weapons that the terrorists are, the so-called terrorists, because now I have to put that in quotes, because they're calling us terrorists, you know, with our actions going over there. But we gave them the guns that they're using now. They have the weapons that were U.S. supplied.
Well, I mean, there are a couple things that come to mind in terms of what all three of you are saying. Like, first, I think, though there's a part of me that finds your idea about looking after U.S. Domestic interests attractive. I think that the world is too connected in order to kind of to kind of advocate a kind of localism or advocate a kind of a nationalism. I think that would be a mistake. However, what we need to invest in is a sense of sovereignty, and I kind of heard that from what Ed was saying, right? That is that the other nations across the globe should have the right to govern their people, right? And what was most saddening to be about the Iraq situation was that with the prosecution of the war on terror, it was the language used was a language of law and order, policing, right? Which essentially made the entire globe U.S. jurisdiction, right? And so that I think is what's the problem, where we can identify. We take on the role of identifying who is a criminal and who is not, right? And we can point in a number of ways in which who we've identified as the criminal is actually innocent, and who we've identified as the innocent is actually guilty, right? So that's what so that's what I was saying before is that we don't have a monopoly on reason or morality. Moreover, we've lost a sense of what produces a national existence, which is sovereignty. If either there's going to be sovereignty for nations and not just the U.S., or we should throw it out and stop acting like there is such a thing as sovereignty.
I agree. And I also think that we don't have a monopoly on, like Ed, on what you were saying, on what is good, because even when we go into another country, like for instance, I've said before on the show that my family is from Honduras. So when I go to Honduras, there are now a lot of factories that are based in Honduras, you know, garment factories and what have you. And people here say, well, those are sweatshops. You're not paying these people enough and you need to pay them more, right? Because we want to do what is good. But when you start paying the people in Honduras an American wage, things just go crazy, because the economy is not created to sustain that. It's not built to sustain an American type economy. So what you have, there's actually been a lot of incidents of increased crime, because now the American factories, right, the owners are paying their workers a lot of money. These people are getting robbed and mugged and killed for the salary because the local jobs just cannot compete. So again, you go into something, right? We're saying, well, we're increasing these people's cost of living and their quality of life because we're giving them these American type salaries. Meanwhile, everything else around them is falling apart because we thought we were doing a good thing. So, it's the same thing. Did you want to say something, Ed?
Yeah, I do want to go and just pull back a little bit, because to go and get too much of a relativist point of view is a little dangerous, because a relativist is saying there's no truth, and they speak of it as if it was a truth. So there's one problem. But the idea of terrorists, we can make a distinction. A terrorist would be a person who has the desire and intent to harm innocent people. Whereas some actions of the United States, there might be an intent to go and do harm, say like drop bombs on particular problem doers, such as ISIS, who behead obviously innocent people, but no desire to go and harm the innocent. There might be collateral damage that actually does harm innocent people, but the desire is missing there. So a distinction could be made, that we don't have the desire to hurt innocent people, but we have the intent to go and stop harm, whereas a terrorist has both the intent and desire to harm innocent people, as we just saw in Pakistan. But now, the danger, of course, is even when we're trying to do something with intent but no desire to harm innocents, we have to be aware that we might be in error in our judgment of who the bad guys are. And
That-
that's where I think I agree with Tyrone.
Exactly. Don, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think that there's, a role for the United Nations in this as well, and obviously Wilson's view of the League of Nations, the preceding the United Nations. There has to be more collaborative efforts made, and the go-it-alone mentality is never going to be successful. In an emergency situation, if you know the gunman is still in the school and the death toll is rising, and you can get some American troops in there, you do that. But you don't overrule the entire country. As a result, you're going to have some discussions. You're going to have intelligence gathering on the ground so that you know who the local factions are, who are the militia leaders, et cetera, and you can make an informed decision. I'm not advocating going in gung-ho wherever we think there's a problem and just arbitrarily choosing a good guy or a bad guy. It requires some intellect and some deliberation, obviously.
Now, do you find, though, that we have been doing that, though, in the past? Because I know we do have the United Nations, but it seems like with the Iraq situation, the United States pretty much acted alone on that.
I'm not sure that's accurate. I think there were other countries involved in Iraq. There were certainly troops in different uniforms
Yes,
that
but
were
the
not
United
American
States
troops
took
in
the
Iraq.
lead.
They
Yeah.
took the lead, and I think that is the appropriate role for the United States, is to take the lead.
Oh, well, yes, I forgot. That was your position.
But I don't think that they should be doing it alone.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
But I think I would have asked the same question that Mirna asked, because on some level that wasn't, that was a coalition of the willing, right? There was a lot of doublespeak going on the part of our national leaders, and
That's not precedent breaking, by the way.
Oh, yeah, right. No question, right? But yeah, there are occasions that we can point to where the United States has found itself going at it alone and has proceeded anyway, right? Moreover, we need to think about how the United Nations, the United Nations has functioned, even in the past couple decades, right? Where there have been pretty much consensus on the part of many of the nations in the UN, but the United States has opted out of what the consensus are. The consensus is certainly so. For instance, climate change. For instance, right? There are ways in which we've avoided supporting the Kyoto Accords in a kind of timely manner, right? We're coming around on that, right? But not only that, we think about the UN, the Security Council, right? So there are five member states on the Security Council. Only those 5 have veto power, right? We're talking about the United Nations, right, where there are hundreds of nations who are member states, right? So as long as there's that imbalance of power, there's going to continue to be a crisis of sovereignty, and there's going to continue to be a kind of bully kind of disposition that the United States carries.
And going back to Iraq and the UN, if we bring the UN in, fine, but we did with Iraq. But what happened is that we cherry-picked, and I'm going to be, again, talking about critical thinking, but we cherry-picked the information. We were looking for evidence of weapons of mass destruction and not looking for counter evidence that might go and mitigate a claim that there were weapons of mass destruction. It turned out that the counterexamples would have been true. Yes, there were a coalition of the willing, but if you notice on the same evidence that was presented to the United Nations, nations like Germany and France, though they had evidence that there could be weapons of mass destruction, they didn't have it conclusively. So I would go and argue that perhaps they actually thought it through. Had we been listening to them, and they held back from being members of that coalition, they got it right. It would seem that perhaps either there was just cherry picking because of ignorance on the part of our leaders or because of a hidden agenda. And that hidden agenda, I think history will go and reveal if it's there.
Well, if it does, if ever, it'll reveal that information. Unfortunately, we've found that in our history, sometimes history is written by the victors. Isn't that what the saying is? Right?
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, Ed, and I think looking at history is important. And if you look at what was the success of Lincoln's presidency, it was that he took a diverse group of people and put them in the cabinet and said, work it out, guys. Come back to me with a solution. I'm going to lock you in the room. You're going to work it out. And to me, that is the intelligent way to get to a solution. You don't get 15 people who all nod their heads in unison. That is not critical thinking. That is lockstep thinking, which is always dangerous.
So you have any final thoughts, gentlemen, before we move on to our lightning round on this?
Let's go to the lightning round.
Well, I did have one, however.
Go ahead,
The
go ahead.
danger seems to be not so much, one ideology over another, with some exceptions, but the idea of dogmatism. The ability to go and say, I'm right. I just heard one of Colbert's jokes. He goes and says, people think with their heads, but I know with my heart. And of course, when you do that, you're not going to question yourself, and there could be a problem personally or nationally.
Absolutely. I agree. Okay. Well, we have an interesting lightning round, very light compared to what we just discussed. And that is vapidity, right? Basically stupidity, the new talent? Because I cannot go on television without seeing what looks like 100 reality shows, each more idiotic than the next. I look at Kim Kardashian and the millions that she's amassed based on a sex tape initially, and then just this show that she has currently, where they just follow her around and she's twirling her hair and, and buying clothes, and that seems to be the new talent. So is vapidity the new talent? Is there no room for anything else for intelligence? And Don?
Well, I'm not going to go to the Kim Kardashian level. I would suggest that you look at the amount of time NBC News and Today Show spent covering Savannah Guthrie's pregnancy and child. Now, it's lovely. It's wonderful. I'm a parent myself.
Yeah.
I don't think it's national news, however. I don't think it's a unique thing to bear a child. We have millions of people in this country. Clearly, this isn't groundbreaking. The amount of time spent on that singular issue on what is primarily a news and information show is a level of vapidity that Kim Kardashian would be embarrassed by.
Ed?
I guess you get the media you deserve, and if people keep on popping up the ratings, they're going to be fed this type of thing. But as I mentioned before, the idea of critical thinking, it gets me rather nervous, but that's why I teach and hopefully can go and cut some of that a little short, right?
Tyrone?
I have a very cynical reading of the Kardashian phenomena, which is if you're in a culture that does not value education, that is retrenching education, retrenching all it does for the public good, but you need the culture to be connected to the idea of the American dream. When the American dream is vanishing
That makes sense.
quickly, right? And what I mean by vanishing quickly is that so much so that hard work doesn't necessarily even equate to success, right? Then what you need is to show the culture the possibility of attaining success without hard work, without struggle,
That
right?
makes sense, yeah.
And so that that the culture can believe that what is lost is not in fact lost, but still attainable. So you don't have to work hard, you don't have to study, you just have to be you. And you don't even have to be captivating, right? It could be something biological, which I assume I have to admit is Kardashian, right? Right? But you just have to be you in order for the culture to embrace you, right? That's perfect in a moment when inequality is expanding and opportunity is disappearing.
Yeah, that makes sense. That was actually very deep for a vapid topic. I think you also have the fact, like you said too, that we are diminishing the value of an education. And I always cringe when I read things. The other day, the New York Times, I think it was either the New York Times or New Yorker magazine had a very in-depth interview with the Will Smith's kids. And they were poo-pooing education. These are kids who are not even in high school yet. And they're like, oh, we're supposed to be homeschooled, but we're technically not. Our parents just kind of let us do our own thing, and we get to decide what we do with our lives. You're 10 or 11 or 13 or 14, however, you should not be deciding what you're doing with your life at that age. You should be in school. You should be learning something and then deciding what you want to do with your life. So I think it gets to that point where you have these the Kardashians, the Paris Hiltons, these people who just have money but really no intelligence, and that's what they have, and that's what they're showing on TV, and that's what they're telling the kids. This is what you should you should attain. That, this is what you should be aspiring to.
I'm going to beg to differ with you on this one.
Go ahead.
These people who have no intelligence have 4 people with postgraduate degrees talking about them.
That is true.
Not bad.
That is true. And they have more money than we'll probably have in our whole
Ever.
lifetime.
But we're going to be measuring our value by money and fame. I'm sorry, that's an issue I'm going to have to take exception to, because if my personal worth is going to be objectified that way, I'm going to be turned into an it, and there's a danger in doing that, because then we could go and see perhaps lots of other problems, like in a previous show that was here, about having people treated as its and perhaps easily killed off as an it.
Exactly. Thank you, gentlemen. That was such an interesting discussion there. And that does it for us for this episode of the Opinion Talk Show. Thank you so much to the viewers out there for watching. Thank you, gentlemen, for attending and having that discussion with me. Please keep sending us your emails and your comments on YouTube. We read every single one of them, so thank you out there.